Russia's largest air assault yet on Ukraine. Hundreds of drones and missiles fired, just days after one of the largest prisoner swaps of this entire war. And even after the attack, more prisoners were exchanged. I spoke with Hal Kempfer, a former senior intelligence officer, about what this signals for the war's trajectory and what comes next for the global balance of power. Since just 2022 alone, that excludes other sanctions, there have been 16,000 sanctions on Russia. Their economy grew 4.3% last year. This is a wartime economy, no doubt. And they've got more than $600 billion in reserves. They're holding non-traditional assets like yuan. And their economy is being buoyed by what we understand typically to be the results of wartime production. Do we really think there's really anything that the United States can do at this point, or the West on the whole, financially, economically, fiscally, to cripple the Russian economy when it's shown almost unmatched resiliency?
Well, we haven't done reciprocal tariffs like what's being discussed, and this would be something that would hit other nations. For example, China and India, which have been importing oil, and that revenue is what buoys the Russian economy. That would hit them hard, because if they were hit with massive tariffs for using Russian oil, they would have to quickly reorient themselves to find alternative sources of oil, which they could. Putin really can't afford to end the wartime economy, because if he was to end the war, the economy is so configured now for supporting wartime needs that it probably couldn't go back, at least anytime soon, to a market type economy. So the chances are politically he wouldn't survive that kind of macro shift.
There has been a collapse of the architecture, strategic architecture of forbearance, and that equilibrium that seemed to have been set throughout the course of the conflict and negotiations between Russia and Ukraine, as you mentioned, is done. You had ceasefire talks, you had prisoner swaps, you have Ukraine signing the minerals deal. This is substantial movement that we haven't seen throughout the course of the conflict. I mean, you could even go back to Crimea in 2014 and say that. And yet Russia has intensified its assaults via the air. Doesn't indicate that the only thing that Russia and Vladimir Putin is interested in is a type of coercive diplomacy. Just
in the last couple of days, again from the Kremlin, we've heard these maximalist, original war goals, talking about, that Zelensky has to leave office, his government has to be dissolved, there cannot be a pro-Western government put in its place in Ukraine, essentially saying that they want to take over Ukraine, and their thinking now is they will use military pressure, not necessarily an invasion, a successful invasion taking all the ground, but military pressure to somehow set the conditions whereupon they can at some point in the future continue with their ground offensive to try and take Ukrainian territory. That's what appears to be what's going on.
You could look at the 1977 additional protocols to the Geneva Convention, for example, or mechanisms available through the International Criminal Court, or even just general accepted humanitarian law to prosecute some of the generals engaged in, say, these high-level aerial assaults that are targeting civilian structures, not military structures, civilian structures. Could that be compelling enough to maybe convince those under Putin who are executing this war to stand down?
Well, right now, I don't think anybody there believes they're ever going to be held accountable on the International Criminal Court. But what was interesting was the Europeans were working with Ukraine on setting up something that looked very much like the military tribunals at the end of World War II, with the idea that Russia is not a signatory to the International Criminal Court. Russia really doesn't care about international law, from what I could tell, but that they might be able to do something with military tribunals. Now, there's a lot of ifs between that ever taking place. Certainly those around Putin probably think that whatever their situation, they're probably done for now if they ever were held before a court for any reason. But having that out there, I think, has a little bit of deterrence maybe further down.
And Kempfer also notes Russia is a brutal regime. Courts may have less deterrence than the threat of Russia's Federal Security Service.